All right. Well, a warm welcome to Slim Science for you. Today I'm going to talk about a question that are on the minds of many individuals who are trying to get slim or stay slim, and that is the effect of time restricted eating on weight loss in adults. In this study, we're going to specifically focus on adults with type 2 diabetes, and this is a randomized clinical trial. So, what we're looking to answer the question with this article: does time restricted eating impact weight loss, and how does it impact it if an individual already has type 2 diabetes? I found this on JAMA Open Network. You can see here the original investigation, nutrition, obesity, and exercise. And here you see the authors of this study. Pavlau is the principal investigator, while Dr. Varday is the senior investigator. And you can see when we look at article information, here is their affiliation and their conflict of interest disclosures. Let's go back to the top now that we have attributed the authors and the publication. All right. What this time-restricted eating study attempts to do is they're asking the question, does a randomized clinical trial, can we see a difference between time-restricted eating and calorie restriction compared with control, those who are eating whatever and whenever they want to? This study had 75 individuals, 22 men, 53 women, average age 55 years, and remember, these are adults with type 2 diabetes and obesity. They put 25, 25, and 25, 25 time-restricted eating, 25 calorie restricted, and 25 control. There was a single academic center in Chicago, Illinois, and they're looking at the change in percent of body weight from the baseline body weight in 6 months, from 0 to 6 months. Their findings by month 6, what they believe their findings show is by month 6, body weight significantly decreased in the time-restricted eating group, but not in the calorie-restricted group compared with the control group. I'm going to dive into this graph because it seems to say that, but there's a catch. All right, let's dive into this. Key points. Question: is the time-restricted eating without calorie counting more effective for weight loss and the lowering of A1C's levels compared with daily restriction, that is calorie restriction, in adults with type 2 diabetes? And they believe their findings show that in a 6-month randomized clinical trial involving 75 adults with type 2 diabetes, that time-restricted eating was more effective for weight loss. So what they're saying is here that there is a loss, so that's the negative sign, negative 3.6%, as compared with calorie restricted, which has a negative 1.8% compared with the controls. Now, when they're talking about significant, we all who are trying to lose weight, any weight loss is significant. They're doing this, when they say significant, they're talking about statistically significant, okay? So we all know that time-restricted eating, which we also have originally come to know as intermittent fasting, they're the same thing. They're just using different words for it to discuss this. So we saw the design already in our graph, but let's take a look a little more closely. All right, so we see our abstract. We saw 75 people, how they were divided, and so forth. So let's just go right ahead. Oh, and by the way, I'm going to put the link for this article in the description. You have to copy and paste the link into your browser in order to get here, because for beginning channels in YouTube, the links apparently aren't active for 2 months or so. So just copy and paste the link and you'll get all of this information at your fingertips. Let's jump to our images. So we already looked at this. Let's go to our next image. Let's see. Let me see if we can advance. We cannot. So I'm going to go back here and look at our next image. So in this image, they're showing you actually how they constructed their clinical trial, which I really appreciated them doing. They started with 127 individuals that they screened. This is how they randomized them, and this is at 6 months. 23 completed 6 months of intervention. In the calorie restricted, 22 completed 6 months of intervention. And in the randomized control group, 24 completed it at 6 month intervention. Now, why I'm showing you this is both because this is a really nice way to explain things. In the written portion of the paper, they discuss how they actually randomized it because the ages are different, the genders are different. They have different, since they're all type 2 diabetics, they have different levels of medication. So you need to make sure, for instance, at one point they're talking about the GLP-1 inhibitors, essentially it's Wegovy, Ozempic. That's a diet drug. So you don't want all the people who are on that to be in one group or not, right? That'll be too confounding for your data. And if you really want to dive in more deeply, I would advise you or recommend that you go check out the written portion of the paper, and it tells you exactly how they took all those things into effect to randomize it. All right, let's continue. So let's dive right into this first graph. We already looked at the body weight loss, the percent, and we see what I noticed right away was that the error bars or the standard deviation, they are definitely overlapping between the calorie restricted, which is here in blue. You can see the blue calorie restricted bars. They are up here, slightly weight gain in some, more weight loss in others. So for the calorie restricted, we can see the percentage was slight, let's call this 0.2% weight gain to as much as 0.5% weight loss. When we do that same lookometric, we can see for the time restricted eating that someone lost, that the bars, first thing what I noticed is that the bars seem to be less wide, right? There seems to be a less deviation in them. They're more narrow. So this seemed to indicate to me that the individuals doing the time restricted eating, that there seemed to be a greater confluence among them relative to the calorie restricted eating. And we're going to see some of that maybe when we look at adherence. All right, so that's percent weight. Let's look at change from baseline of the A1Cs. So let's see. Let me see if I can make that smaller. I don't think you're gonna see that. But what we're looking at here, essentially the yellow one is the time restricted eating. This blue one is the calorie restricted, and this is the control. So for the mean A1C, so that's the average A1C, you can see appears to not make a difference whether you're using time restricted eating or calorie restricted. That's interesting to me that we're not seeing a difference here. Now you may be thinking right off the bat, as did I, that, well, remember that these individuals are on medication for their type 2 diabetes, and it is to try to keep the swings of glucose more narrow. However, the control group is also on medication, and they had quite a bit of a different change in their eating. So what I would conclude from this is that there's really no change in time restricted eating versus calorie restricted when you're looking at the A1Cs. And very similar over here on graph C when we're looking at the mean glucose levels. You can see the average glucose levels in those that have no dietary restrictions are really not only going up, the change from baseline is going up, but there's a pretty good spread. Versus for, again, time restricted eating versus calorie restricted are very similar. although the calorie restricted, honestly, does look like it did a bit better. All right, let's moving right along. So I'm not going to dive into this because I don't want the video to be too long, but if you're interested in the makeup of the population of the 75 individuals involved in this, I would strongly recommend you take a look at this page, the baseline characteristics for the study participants. You can see the average ages for time restricted eating, calorie restricted, and controls. About the same age, roughly, and so forth. Race, ethnicity, type 2 diabetes, and so forth. But let me, so this is to really help us understand the subjects metabolically, physiologically better. All right. Now, one of the things that I wanted to share with you also was this graph. I found it fascinating because here we're looking at the participant group, the average, and the standard deviation. So for the time restricted eating, for the calorie restricted, and control, I found it fascinating that the calories, so when we talk about energy intake, it's kcals. So for the baseline for the tree group, it's 1978. For the calorie restricted group, it's about 1707. And for the control, it's 1834. So it's interesting when they randomized it, maybe they didn't randomize it for what the participants were already eating. Were they on any other kind of restriction already that they were doing? The other thing, so this is the baseline, and this is going to become relevant for interpreting the data, the final data. They started with 1978, and at 6 months, their calories reduced by, let's see, that is 213, right? 213. So essentially, over this period of time, the people on the time-restricted eating, their average calorie intake went down. What did we say? 213? Roughly 213? Knowing that it's tough to really accurately calculate your calories. So roughly they went down 213 calories. For this group here, they started at 1707 and they went down 15. So they went down little, maybe 193, something like that, right around 200. So this group actually, while they have more net calories at 6 months than this group actually reduced their average calorie intake more than this group. Now that you could say, well, bravo, yeah, and I do. But that might indicate that time restriction is a good mechanism to help you reduce calories. But it also tells me that this group, whether you're the time restricted or the calorie restricted, they're both calorie restricted diets. Make sense? Because they're both restricting calories. One is eating 1,665 calories in a short window. The other is eating 1,500 calories in an open window where they can eat wherever they want to. So I found that really interesting, that they both restricted calories, and that originally was not my understanding of the study, that they were looking at two mechanisms of restricting calorie. All right, now let's look at the supplemental content, because that goes a long way for helping us as well. So we already, let's take a look at the trial protocol. We've looked at this through the graphs already, so I'm not going to look too much here. But again, if you really want to see how they did it and dive into it, this is a great place to start. What I really want to look at, there we close out, what I really want to look at is the supplemental content, but supplement 2. All right, so medication. let's take a look at the medication. There we go. So the individuals in this study, remember, they all have type 2 diabetes, and they're all going to have, different treatment protocols to control their type 2 diabetes. But the individuals all have the shown medication. Not one individual is taking all of these medications, but these medications are represented in this data. And you can see it includes metformin. We have 2 kinds of inhibitors. We have a GLP-1 agonist. So remember, the GLP-1s are actually diet drugs, and so you're going to say, well, but they must be taking Ozempic, not Wegovy. It's the same drug, right? Different name. And we know that the Wegovy, which is for weight loss, is very good, especially in the short term, in the first 6 months or so, at helping you to lose weight. So this is actually a weight loss drug, whether you call it Wegovy or you call it Ozempic. You also see that there's insulin and sulfonylureas. These are some are going to be long-acting insulin control, or long-acting control and shorter-acting control. All of them are going to impact your weight and your weight loss, and is an extremely difficult confounding factor to balance for. Now, they go in the paper and they talk a great deal about how they did this, it's a very detailed, very biostats heavy portion of the paper. You can read it, but my takeaway is that it's very difficult, unless the individuals are really on a very, very similar regimen for medication. It's going to be very difficult to say that these individuals that there's not inherent bias in the data. Not in the research, not in the scientists, but in the data, because of these confounding variables. Okay, we've already talked a little bit about the weight change, adverse events. They looked at that. This is the experimental design, where for the time-restricted eating, they could eat between lunch and bed, essentially, 12 to 8. It was a 16-hour fast. For calorie restricted, they did 25% of the energy restriction daily. So individuals had their height and weight, and their BMI was calculated, and based on that, in a lookup, you could see how many calories for that individual should have, and then they restricted their calories by 25%. All right, this is one of the major points, I think, that is further confounding of the conclusions of the paper. So what we're looking at here is adherence data in column A, or in segment A. We're looking at the number of days adherent and the study month. So 1, 3, and 6 months. Looks like mostly people were adherent 6 out of 7 days. So 1 day a week they were not adherent. Maybe they ate later or ate sooner, Sunday brunch or something. I don't know. But, the time-restricted eating, the adherence looks like mostly they were adherent. In the calorie-restricted adherence, I was a little confused about this, why we didn't see the study month, why we didn't see the first month for adherence, any adherence data. I'm sure that when they started the study, people started doing their numbers. So I would have liked to see that number here. We see because typically you're enthusiastic, you'd expect adherence to be high. So just not sure what went on here, but would really like to have seen that. That makes me wonder. At 3 months, we saw about 79% adherence. So people were cheating on their diet, or they weren't recording it. Could have been that as well. By 6 months, we're seeing that maybe 40% of the people are cheating or not recording. We don't really know. What we see here in the explanation is that a total of 20 out of 25 calorie-restricted participants returned all food records. So It's not clear to me if, for instance, the 6-month, if these 20 people if they returned all their food records, that is from day 1 to the last day, or did they just return all their food records and were all their food records 100% complete? That's the part that I'm really not understanding here. So let's assume it's the latter, that 20 people returned all their food records and they recorded all their eating. Based on this, it would mean that 40% of the time they didn't adhere, they were not within the realm of the dietary restriction. So here's the problem. You have the time-restricted individuals, and then you have a group of individuals who are calorie restricted, but only maybe 60% of the time by the end date, right? So if that's the case, are you now really comparing calorie restrictions anymore because of the sizable deviation from the protocol, right? So if you're supposed to do something every day a certain way and you only do it 60% of the time, can you really compare that number to the time-restricted eating group? That's one concern I have. And, and again, all of us who've ever been on a diet know that calorie restriction and recording everything you eat is really tough. So, you're making dinner for your family and, you have to taste it to see, is it, how is it? Each one of those bites, I remember once reading that depending on what you're cooking, it could be from 20 to 100 calories a bite. And I don't know what kind of bite the 100 calorie, but my point being, would I record that taste of the food to see if it's ready? I don't know. I don't think so. So you can see it's very hard. Time-restricted eating, I think, does show that it's easier to restrict calories based on time. Now let me back up to, let's see, where is it? Let's look back at here we go. Let's look back here at our results, because there was something quite fascinating when we talked about results, which didn't pop out immediately. Let's look at table 3. We already spent a little bit of time looking at this, and I took that time because I wanted to make the point that the time-restricted eating really was calorie restricted, as was the calorie restricted. So the time-restricted eating was easier to restrict those calories, so they were more adherent to a calorie restriction. The calorie restricted diet, they could eat whenever they wanted to, so it was much tougher to adhere to that restriction. So in conclusion, let me go back. In conclusion, what I think we're looking at here is the conclusion that, I'm jumping all over the place. So what their conclusion is that this randomized trial found that time-restricted eating strategy, diet strategy, without calorie counting, so I'm not sure how they found those calories if they weren't calorie counting, was effective for weight loss and lowering A1Cs. So we do see that, right? We do see that the time-restricted eating diet strategy, not sure where the calorie counting came in, they did lose weight, and their A1C did go down compared with daily calorie counting. Well, the daily calorie counting for the A1Cs, they were identical. So I don't see, and I'm probably missing something. Help me see where I'm missing it. But I'm not seeing that the statement can be made that the time restricted eating had a better outcome for A1Cs than did the calorie restricted. They looked pretty similar to me, identical. Actually, if anything, calorie restricted did a little bit better when it came to glucose, if not A1Cs. So I have some concerns about that. Maybe I'm not understanding something. Help me out if you see I'm missing something. But I think our graphs pretty much showed that wasn't true. That the diet strategy without calorie counting was effective. It did lose weight, but so did the calorie restricted ones. The time restricted eating was a calorie restricted eating. They showed it in the data. The calorie restricted eating was calorie restricted, but the compliance was low. Not low. There was a compliance issue when at the end there was 40% were no longer compliant. But you compare those 6 months to 6 months, and I'm not clear that they dropped out the people who were not compliant. Maybe they did, and that data is buried in here, and I missed it. So at the end of the day, it looks like they're comparing two lower calorie diets. What they could say is that the time restricted eating may be a easier way to restrict calories than just straight calorie restricted. That I think they could say. Don't think they can say that the A1Cs are better or even that glucose control is better. Not seeing that. So in conclusion, I think that hits 2 points. The other thing, let me see, concerns I would have had for this study is it's small, 75 people, 25 in each group, means every time somebody drops out becomes, it's not insignificant. But again, I also know in clinical trials you have to start small in order to do a pilot study on it. The adherence issue I've already touched on. Let's see. And so I think the last thing question I had essentially was that the senior author on this article, they do talk about, let's see, there is a discussion of the conflict of interest disclosures, and the senior author has three books on diet books, and a new one coming out, or is in process of coming out, or just came out. It is specifically on the benefits of time restricted eating, and I thought those books might have been good to come in the conflict of interest disclosure. I'm not saying that there is a conflict of interest, right? You'd write about what, you believe in this, so you're writing a book about it, you're writing an article about it, you're doing research on it. Not saying, making any inferences, just saying that probably would have been good to put there. At the end of the day, what it showed to me is that time restricted eating makes calorie restriction easier. And that's all that we can really take away from this study for now. But I am looking forward to the next study, which apparently they're already planning to do. I hope you liked this video. If you did, remember to like and subscribe, and we'll do another one tomorrow. Bye.